Before I start the video, I want to discuss the terminology I'll be using. If you're pro-life, then you believe the unborn child is a separate life with its own rights. If you're pro-choice, then you believe the unborn is part of the woman's body. You either believe it isn't a human life, or you believe that it is a life, but you don't believe it has its own rights. I think the term pro-choice is misleading because the unborn child doesn't have a choice. But the term pro-death is derogatory since if you really believe it's part of the woman's body, then you're not being pro-death. So I will use the term pro-abortion, which means you believe that abortion should be an option because to you, the issue is about the woman rather than the unborn. Likewise, some people have issues with the term pro-life because,
how many flies have you swatted lately? What about that cow who died so you can eat your steak, huh?
And of course, anti-choice is a derogatory term since we also believe that a woman has bodily autonomy. But we are of the position that the unborn is an entirely separate life with its own bodily autonomy as well. So I'll use the term anti-abortion as the antithesis of pro-abortion. A lot of pro-abortion people get butthurt over the fact that I use the term unborn child even though the term is accurate, because they don't believe it's a child yet. They'd rather call it an embryo, or zygote, or fetus.
Nope, it is a ball of cells, it is a zygote, it is an embryo.
Okay, that's fine. But whatever you decide to call it, the bottom line is that it was a direct result of the reproductive process. So you can really use any of those terms. It won't change my points. Because what they all have in common is the fact that they didn't just pop up out of nowhere. It took the combination of a male and female sex cell to create them. The anti-abortion position is the only consistent and logical position to take. Life begins at conception. The fertilized egg is a direct result of sexual intercourse. It could not have come to be in any other way, and it has its own DNA separate from that of the mother. That is the start of growth and development for a new life. And prior to conception, no new life has formed or could come into being. Conception is the starting point. The pro-abortion position just puts the cutoff at some arbitrary point. Some pro-abortion people will say it's not a life until the second or third trimester, or it's not a life until it's born, or until it has a heartbeat, it's not a life, or it's only a life 3 weeks after conception. Pro-abortion people have drastically different cutoff points. It's not consistent at all.
So when did your life begin?
When I exited my mother's womb.
So when is it a person? That's my question. At what point of the pregnancy is it a person? That's my question.
Third trimester.
If one pro-abortion person says it's not a life with rights until the third trimester, and another one says it's not a life with rights until it's born, then they will both agree that during the first 6 months of pregnancy, it's not a life with rights. But they will disagree with each other about the final 3 months of pregnancy. But what all the pro-abortion positions do have in common is that they aren't backed by any evidence. They're all mere opinion on when life begins. It's analogous to a race. When does a race begin? The moment you hear the starting gun. Prior to the gun firing, nobody moved. After the gun fired, people started to run. The gun firing is like conception. Prior to that point, growth and development had not started, nor could it start, since no reproduction took place. But after conception, it did. The pro-abortion position makes as much sense as saying that the race didn't start until 5 seconds after the gun fired, or the race didn't begin until everyone took at least 10 steps first. The point of sexual activity is reproduction. It's a kind of self-preservation. We don't live forever, but we can pass down our genes. This sexual desire is merely a biological mechanism that helps propagate the species. Now, I understand that people want and do engage in sexual activity without wanting a kid. They like the feeling of sex, but they don't want the responsibilities of being a parent. They want to take the good, but not the bad, so to speak. I get it. But if you use something in a way that wasn't intended, then you have to be careful of the risks. A chair is not meant to be used as a step stool, and you risk injury if you use it in that way. If you get hurt, you have nobody to blame but yourself. We eat to live. Our bodies need nourishment. Now, we may get pleasure eating truckloads of candy, but our bodies weren't meant to eat that. If you continue to eat all this processed sugar, you have nobody to blame but yourself when you get fat or if you get diabetes. Saying that it's wrong to, quote, force a woman to continue her pregnancy just because she didn't intend to have a baby is like saying it's wrong that you got unhealthy for eating so much candy, as if someone forced you to get fat by eating so much candy. You took the risk in the beginning, and now you have to deal with the consequences of your actions. And no, saying that it's not a human life and terminating the pregnancy is not dealing with the consequences. It's the exact opposite. It's flat out denying the fact that it's a separate human life so that you no longer have to deal with the unwanted progeny. Remember, you chose to have sex in the first place. It's not like some random person came up to you with a baby and was like, here you go. Let's say you performed a dangerous stunt. You really have no right to complain if you get injured because by performing the stunt, you took on the risk of injury. Sure, you would have preferred not to be injured, but since you took it upon yourself to do something risky, you now have to deal with some pain for a while. Same idea with procreation. Maybe you didn't mean to produce a new life, but you engaged in an activity that can cause such a thing to happen. The following are the most common pro-abortion arguments I've come across. I'd even go so far as to say this is an exhaustive list of all pro-abortion arguments I've ever heard. I have yet to hear a pro-abortion argument that wasn't one of the following 20. As you'll see, most pro-abortion arguments are either deflections, ad homs, irrelevant points, or flat-out falsehoods, or a combination of those.
How about our bodies, our choices?
Her body, her choice! Her body, her choice! My body! My choice! My body! My choice!
You know what? This is my stomach, and I get to decide what I do with it. You know why? Because it's mine!
You want to kill babies?
You can't tell me what to do with my stomach.
You want to kill...
It's mine!
It's not her body. It's a separate life. It has its own DNA. And it was a direct result of the reproductive process. Just because it's inside her doesn't make it part of her body. Just like I'm not a car part just because I'm inside of a car.
You're male. You don't have a uterus.
So?
You're gonna have an
For beliefs.
All of you are men, and this is a women's issue.
And you, as a man, should not have a single say in that.
You guys don't have uteruses. You can't argue it.
What do you all have in common?
We're against abortion, against the murder of the unborn.
You're all men.
Okay.
Okay? Do you all hate women? I am totally judging you. I think you hate women. I think you're misogynist.
You three men are going to decide on the fate of a woman's life?
The difference is size.
Fuck you.
Fuck you is your answer.
Fuck you is my answer.
Okay.
You're a man. Shut the fuck up.
No, if you're a man, shut up, okay? That you're never going to be able to experience this, so it's really none of your business at all.
But men don't have to go through an abortion. You don't know what it's like.
It feels like really like one-sided when it's just white males professing all this.
Number one, that is an ad hom. It's addressing the person making the argument and dodges the argument itself. There are lots of women who are against abortion for the same reasons I am. Two different people are saying the exact same words, but if these words pour out of a man's mouth, he's told he's not allowed to have a say in the matter. Number two, it's a double standard. If you said that a woman is not allowed to have an opinion on an issue simply because she's a woman, you'd be called sexist and misogynist. Yet, somehow, these same people don't think it's sexist to say that men aren't allowed to have any thoughts on this issue. Number three, it's inconsistent. They actually have no issue if men speak up about abortion, as long as they are pro-abortion too. So according to these pro-abortion women, men are only allowed to have an opinion as long as it's the same opinion as theirs. Otherwise, they try to silence men. Oh, by the way, who decided on Roe v. Wade? That's right, men did. The same pro-abortion women who say that men should have no say on this topic have no problem referring to a Supreme Court decision where 7 men agreed with them. Number 4, it's inconsistent for another reason. The reason why they say men aren't allowed to speak up about abortion is that they don't know what it's like to get pregnant. So by that same reasoning, women who have never gotten pregnant, or women who can't have kids of their own, shouldn't be allowed to have an opinion on abortion either. Women who have never gotten pregnant are effectively in the same position as men in that they don't know what it's like. Number 5, just because I haven't experienced something doesn't mean I'm not allowed to have an opinion on it. You can be against slavery even if you've never owned or been a slave.
Here are 4 more animal embryos. Can you spot the person?
What it looks like is irrelevant. It still has its own DNA separate from the mother's, and it came into being as a direct result of the reproductive process. True, the pig, dolphin, mouse, and human embryos all have a similar shape, and it may be hard for some people to tell them apart with the naked eye. But there is obviously a way to tell them apart, otherwise you would not have been able to differentiate them in the first place. But I'm glad she admits that it's human.
When does a human become a human?
When it can survive on its own outside the fetus,
outside the womb. Yeah, it's like feeding off of the life source of the mother. It doesn't have its own.
You don't agree with her.
Yes, it's dependent in the womb, and it will also be dependent after it's born. This dependency argument is not unique to just the womb. Children are dependent inside the womb and for years after birth. So this argument isn't really saying anything. Besides, if dependency determines personhood, then you'd also have to say that people on life support, or who depend on machines to live, are also not separate human beings with rights because, after all, they can't survive on their own either.
Oh, it's a religious thing. Okay, that makes sense. Beautiful country, we have a thing called separation of church and state.
Your views on God do not control my life, and they never will.
They're religious fanatics.
This one doesn't apply to me personally since I'm not religious, but this is yet another ad hom. Even if the person is against abortion for religious reasons, that isn't the only reason why they're against it. As long as they are not making any religious references in their argument, then the person's religious affiliation is irrelevant. I'll leave a link to Inspiring Philosophy's video addressing abortion. He's a Christian, but you'll notice he makes no appeals to religion in his arguments.
Do you all believe in the death sentence, the death penalty? Do you believe in that?
You agree with justice?
So you're against murder, but you believe in the death penalty.
This is another one that doesn't apply to me personally since I'm against the death penalty. However, people who are anti-abortion are against the killing of an innocent person, whereas the death penalty is killing someone who is not innocent. What is inconsistent is being against the death penalty because of the possibility that it might take an innocent life, but also being pro-abortion when that definitely will take an innocent life.
Based on many pro-life arguments, one can easily argue back that masturbation is murder.
This one doesn't apply to me anymore since I'm on NoFap. But new life doesn't come about from sperm cells alone. Masturbation doesn't create babies. Reproduction doesn't work that way. If you jacked off into a tube sock, would a baby grow out of that? Spoiler alert, no. Let me explain basic biology. Humans reproduce sexually. It takes both a male and female to create new life. It's when sperm meets egg that new life is created. If and only if that happens, does new life occur. So no. Masturbation is nothing like having an abortion because conception did not take place. The starting gun didn't fire.
Like, you step on ants all day and you don't get all emotional about that. Yeah.
So do you kill flies?
That's a deflection. The abortion issue doesn't involve other animals, so bringing it up is irrelevant and it just derails the discussion. But I will say this. What gets the pro-abortion people off the hook? Nobody would say it was inconsistent of them to value human life over other forms of life. But for some reason, anti-abortion people have to value all living creatures equally, simply because we say life begins sooner. Both sides of this issue can value human life over other forms of life. The only difference is when we say human life begins.
If you really cared about the lives that were being lost in abortions, you would be volunteering at foster homes or orphanages.
What do you do to deal with all of the children who have been given up for adoption because their parents can't support them because they didn't have the option of abortion?
I know one thing about the discomfort.
If you want to do good work, you know what you can do? You can help children who are struggling in this country.
But I'm saying, which of you men are going to adopt those children?
Are they take care of them all? Adopt them?
How many children that other women were forced babies women who couldn't have abortions, how many of those children have you supported?
Ma'am, your arguments...
How many children?
Do you want to have a conversation or do you want to yell?
How many children have you supported from birth to well
I have 4 of my own children.
Yeah, I'm not talking about your own children. I'm talking about children who had been born, who couldn't be supported.
May I show you?
Mothers.
Would you like to see?
I don't give a shit.
I can't speak for everybody, but as for me, I don't like kids. I don't want kids. That's why I'm not having any of my own. So why would I want yours?
I don't like other people's children. I see no reason why I would like my own any better.
The anti-abortion position is not about covering for your unintended consequences. Just because I'm not going to adopt your kids personally doesn't mean there aren't plenty of other people who will. This is another ad hom deflection. They are talking about what I personally would or would not do rather than discussing the topic at hand, namely the unborn child and whether or not it's a life with its own rights.
If you don't like abortions, don't have one.
If you object to induced abortions on a purely moral standpoint, then the solution for you is simple. Don't ever have one.
If you don't want to get an abortion and you don't like abortions, don't get one. Don't get one, but don't take that right away from somebody else. Like, what the fuck? How selfish are you?
People against abortion are of the position that it's tantamount to murder. So when you say this to someone who's anti-abortion, you're basically saying, don't like killing? Then don't kill anyone, but don't stop others from doing it. Murder is not a matter of preference. You could say something like, if you don't like olives, don't eat them. Or if you don't like this company, don't buy products or services from them. But you can't do that with things like murder. Your rights end where someone else's begins.
Well, that's the problem. The fact that children being set up for adoption is expensive. I heard that some foster homes didn't care much about adopted children. Also, life is tough and unfair and humans are stupid, selfish, greedy in their nature, right? Don't get me wrong, there are people who are far from that, but the thing is, when you abort that child, isn't that like ending the child's possible misery and suffering?
But for a woman who is poor or unable to take care of that child and decides not to get an abortion, obviously she's not going to be able to take care of it. It's going to have a worse life, right?
We are killing the babies because we cannot take care of them.
I'm just going to say, if you bring a kid into the world and you're not ready to love it, that kid is going to have the shittiest life.
That may or may not be true.
Worth being dead. It's true, okay?
Well, that's not...
I am having a child. Like it's not a question of murdering. It's a question that if you can carry this child, if you can take care of this child. And I think that that's a quality of life thing on that child's life.
Okay.
And if you want to have the child and then put it through whatever system, mess its psychology up, you know, like then raise a human being in this society that's really messed up. I think that's worse than killing the child.
Really?
From day one.
To end the life?
I think it is. I think
so.
I'm going to go on that note.
So they're under the impression that quality of life should determine whether someone gets to live or not. Okay, so maybe the child won't be on lifestyles of the rich and famous, but how is killing it better than letting it live? The pro-abortion advocates are attempting to sound like they have the best interest of the child in mind. Like, see? We're sparing it from having to live a poor life. Meanwhile, they can let it live, and if the biological parents aren't able to take care of their child themselves, they can put it up for adoption to people who can provide a better life for it. That is, after all, what adoption is for.
It's a life after they've been expelled from the birth canal. Anything before that time, it's a parasite.
It is a parasite until that human being is potentially born.
You're calling an unborn baby a parasite?
Yes, I'm calling an unborn baby a parasite.
It's a piece of flesh. It is no more than a tumor at that point.
No, an unborn child is not a parasite, not even in a strictly technical sense. A parasite is an organism that lives in or on an organism of another species. Obviously, the unborn child is not a different species from the mother. The unborn child is not an outside organism that forced its way into the mother to feed off of her. The child is the mother's natural offspring. Parasites also injure the host. And although pregnancy may be uncomfortable and inconvenient, it's not a relationship that usually injures the mother.
If I was holding a fetus, right, and I was also holding a baby, and I dropped both of them at the same time, and you could only save one, which one would you save?
If you say that you would save someone who is born rather than unborn, that's supposed to somehow prove that the unborn is not a life. The problem with this is that in this hypothetical, you're making me pick one over the other. Saving both is not an option. Naturally, one of them will not be saved. That doesn't mean that what I didn't save wasn't a life. I could ask the same kind of question. If you could only pick one, who would you save, your own child or someone else's? If you pick your own, you're obviously not saying that the other child isn't really a human life worth saving. But if you had to pick just one, you're gonna pick your own, of course. So no matter what your answer is to this question, it doesn't prove anything.
I draw the line before third trimester because if I don't want a kid and it's in the second, it's still legal for me to abort it.
Just because it's legal doesn't mean it's a good law. Slavery used to be legal, but you wouldn't say it was good just because it was legal. Besides, there are inconsistencies with the legality of abortion. There is the Unborn Victims of Violence Act. If someone kills a pregnant woman, it counts as a double homicide. In other words, killing the unborn does legally count as murder, except for when the mother does it. So women literally are getting away with murder. Even if a pregnant woman was ironically killed while she was on her way to have an abortion, it counts as a double homicide. It's either a separate life or it isn't. You can't just say it's part of the woman's body, but then if someone kills the pregnant woman, it somehow magically counts as a separate life. Another note about the legality of abortion, technically, Roe v. Wade is not a law. It's a Supreme Court decision. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say that Congress can delegate legislative authority.
Also, if abortion was outlawed, do you think that would actually stop it?
Probably not. But laws against assault and thievery don't stop those things from happening either. Should we chuck out those laws just because they didn't fully stop those crimes from happening? Laws can never fully prevent crimes from happening. They can only punish you when you're caught doing them.
It's a clump of cells.
A wicked lie.
That's like a collection of cells.
A Catholic hospital telling a
Clump
woman.
of cells.
What you're saying is that financially,
cluster of cells
ma'am,
is not
this shows
a
that you don't
person.
know what you're talking about.
It's a little thing, like a little nut. It cannot survive outside the womb.
So, were you a nut?
Yes, at one point I was.
All of us are clumps of cells and blobs of tissue. And like all of us, the clump of cells they're talking about also came about as the result of the reproductive process. Bottom line, if it's growing and developing, it's alive. Just like if these racers are running, it's a race.
But what if the person was raped? If you had ever been raped, there is no way you would be so cavalier about this issue.
What about kids, women who are raped?
Have you ever been raped?
No, shut up.
Nobody is denying that rape is a horrendous crime. The rapist should be punished, not the unborn progeny who had nothing to do with the crime. Abortions due to rape make up 1/3 of 1% of all abortion cases. So the other 99.67% of abortions were just unwanted pregnancies from people who consented to have sex in the first place and should have known the risks of what they were getting themselves into. But rather than abstaining or pulling out or taking the proper precautions, they decided to end their offspring's life out of convenience. When it comes to abortion, rape is the exception, not the rule. Again, it's a horrendous crime, but punish the rapist, not the innocent party. Killing the unborn child who had nothing to do with the crime won't make the fact that the woman was raped go away. It's just going to add one more wrongdoing to another. Also, even the most hardcore pro-abortion advocates would agree that it would be wrong to kill a 1-year-old baby who was conceived in rape. Again, the only difference here is the unborn child is still in the womb. And as I've stated before, that doesn't change the fact that it's a separate human life. The one and only time I think abortion is acceptable is when the mother's life is at risk. Of course, every measure should be taken to try to save the unborn child. But if abortion is the only way to save the mother's life, then it's okay in that case because it's self-defense.
Due to overpopulation, mandatory abortions will one day be necessary.
That's still a human baby.
Notice that whenever they say this, they never explain how they know the world is overpopulated. They simply say that it is, and we're supposed to just take it as fact. The population replacement rate is 2.1, and the birth rate is lower than that, so it's not true that the world is overpopulated. Even if the world was overpopulated, it doesn't change the fact that the unborn is still a separate human life with its own right to life. We can't simply go around killing people just because there are too many. If the world was dangerously overpopulated, as some people erroneously claim, then how about fewer romps in the sacks? You can always abstain from the activity that could create a new life. Or you could pull out more often.
At what point do you get to decide how someone will spend the next 9 months? what health risks they will take. Can you force someone to give up a kidney or get diabetes because of some ideological position you're taking? How much risk can you force someone to take for someone other than themselves? Can they do that to you? If someone is in need of a kidney, can they take one of yours? Just to clarify, we are not forced to do whatever needed to save the lives of others. You are not forced to do a kidney transplant. You are not forced to even give blood. There is a good reason for that. Your body, your choice. Even if that choice means that someone else will die, you are never responsible for the life of someone else if that person needs your body to survive. This goes for abortion as well. The child is using the woman's body to survive.
This argument is really just a corollary to the dependency argument I already addressed. Of course the baby is surviving through the mother's body. That's how reproduction works. The progeny did not choose for that to happen. The parents did. I agree that nobody is obligated to give up a kidney to keep someone alive, but here's the difference. For the mother to keep the baby alive, she doesn't have to do anything. She actually has to do something to kill it. On the other hand, donating body parts is the exact opposite. I have to do something in order to keep you alive, namely give up an organ. But if I do nothing, you will die. So this idea of, quote, forcing a woman to keep a baby is a misnomer. She doesn't have to do anything to keep her offspring alive. She'd have to go more out of her way to kill it. Here's the thing. Let's say we have John and Kevin who live somewhere in Timbuktu. John shoots Kevin dead. I have no idea who John or Kevin are. I couldn't care less about them. But I still recognize that John murdered Kevin. Even if someone I really despised got murdered, I would still obviously recognize it as murder. So whether I care about the person or I don't is irrelevant. Killing is killing. Again, this is another emotionally based ad hom deflection. They call into question my personal feelings toward the child. But we're supposed to be dealing in facts, not feelings. Pro-abortion people love to accuse anti-abortion people of the very thing that they themselves are guilty of. Pro-abortion advocates tend to accuse us of appealing to emotions instead of rational arguments. But as I've demonstrated in this video, I've used science to back up my position and pointed out logical fallacies in their arguments to take down their position. No appeals to emotion were used. If I was to let my emotions and feelings guide my opinion on this issue, then I would actually be pro-abortion. As I said before, I'm not a fan of babies or little children, so any method where we have fewer of them around would be okay in my book. So I don't hold the anti-abortion position due to any emotional connection with children. I'm only interested in the facts. The fact remains that it is a life from the moment of conception. To deny that fact would be to deny basic biology. Pro-abortion people accuse anti-abortion people of appealing to emotion when they show videos or pictures of abortion procedures. But the reason they present those pictures is to show that it is a human that's being killed. You can see for yourself the identifiable body parts. It's actually the pro-abortion people who appeal to emotion much more often. As I mentioned before, they will question your personal feelings toward the unborn child. They will also constantly bring up the rape case, even though it's less than 1% of all abortion cases. And when you respond to them by being consistent in your position, even in the case of rape, they'll talk about what a monster you are for holding that position. That's an appeal to emotion.
Now let me start off by saying that if your first instinct is to link me to some videos or photographs of a bloodied aborted fetus, you will be doing nothing but appealing to emotion and grossing me out. There aren't many things that are worse than having your body violated. But to be constantly reminded of it every single day because of a pregnancy and the offspring that results from it has got to be far more emotionally painful than having the pregnancy terminated.
To be fair, appeals to emotion can potentially happen on both sides of this debate. One side on behalf of the mother and the other on behalf of the child. Let's pretend for just a minute that I am pro-abortion. There is still a big issue that's not resolved. Men do not have an equivalent option for abortion. If a woman isn't ready to be a mother, she can abort it. If the man isn't ready to be a father, he cannot back out. He must pay child support whether he likes it or not. If Larry and Gina both agreed that if she gets pregnant she will have an abortion, and later on she does get pregnant but changes her mind and wants to keep it, well, the man is screwed now. She went back on her word. but he still doesn't want to be a father. In a situation like that, I think Larry should be able to walk away since it was Gina who broke their agreement. If she wants to keep it, by all means do so. But Larry's equivalent to abortion is that he should be able to sever ties with them. Reproduction is not a woman's issue, it's a parent's issue. As such, both parents should have the same parental rights and responsibilities. Rights and responsibilities go hand in hand. You are responsible for the rights you exercise. Now, a lot of pro-abortion advocates have no problem with calling abortion a woman's right. But when you dare mention women's responsibilities that should go along with those rights, they will jump down your throat. They'll say, "What about the man? It takes 2 people to get pregnant." And I completely agree. The problem is that people only remember that when it comes to responsibilities, but they forget that when it comes to rights. Men already have the responsibilities. And if you're talking about this issue as solely a woman's right, then it only affects the woman's end of the responsibilities. As I said before, what I've shown in this video was an exhaustive list of all the pro-abortion arguments that I've ever heard. What happens when they run out of these talking points? Well, usually 2 things. They will either remain quiet because they have nothing to say.
How about the 150 babies per hour that are killed, including women? Do you support them?
Sir, do you believe in free speech? Free speech? Why are you blocking our sign? I'm not sure. Would you like to explain your sign? Nothing to say about your sign.
Or they will keep saying the same things over and over and dodge your points because they have nothing else to say.
Monica Klein is a founding partner at Seneca Strategies. She joins us today. Monica, thanks a lot for coming on.
Yeah.
I'm sure you describe yourself as pro-choice. I bet a lot of people watching right now think of themselves as pro-choice. So I'm not attacking you for that. But I wonder what you think of what Dr. Northam, the governor of Virginia, just said, that when a child, he described the child as an infant, is born, there's a point where the mother and the physician can decide whether to kill the infant or not. What do you think of that?
Look, Tucker, I understand that you want to go back to a time where Roe v. Wade was illegal, where women were having back alley abortions, and they were using coat hangers to have abortions, which is actually what's barbaric.
I'm giving you time to make a real argument. I'm not arguing for the repeal of Roe v. Wade. I'm a very straightforward person.
That is what you're essentially saying.
Actually, no, that's not what I'm arguing. And please don't be tiresome. The governor of Virginia, who's a rising star in the Democratic Party, just said this. There's pending legislation that mirrors it, and I'm asking you what you think of it. That's it. I'm not here to debate Roe v. Wade.
I think that right now, reproductive health care is under attack by the Republican Party. 72% of Americans support the right to choose, and yet we have Trump and we have sexual predator Kavanaugh trying to repeal Roe v. Wade and trying to take away our control over our own bodies. This isn't about babies. This isn't about health care. This is about you attempting to control women's bodies.
Okay, please don't be a robot. Monica, you're smarter than that. This is the governor of Virginia just saying this. I just want to know what you think of it. Is that okay? Does that bother you? It's a sincere question. This just happened.
Okay, it bothers me that you are attempting to control women's bodies. That's what you're doing. You are. The Republican Party right now is working overtime to repeal Roe v. Wade and to take away choice in every single state.
I wonder if you think you're convincing anybody, or if your unwillingness to address what just happened today on tape that we just played is a sign that you can't defend this. And if you can't defend it, I wonder why that is. Have you paused to ask yourself, as an American, as a person, what do I, as a woman, what do I think of that?
As a woman, what do I think of it? Have you asked yourself why you spend so much time talking about this rather than thinking about why your party is trying to repeal Roe v. Wade and control women's bodies? Right now, there are 7 states where there's only 1 abortion clinic, There are 4 states with trigger bans where we would, if Roe v. Wade is repealed, women cannot get reproductive health care. This is about a woman's right to choose, and you, as a man, should not have a single say in that.
Wow. Do you think that you're making a case that most people agree with, that it's okay to abort a child in the 3rd trimester
Tucker,
for
you can keep trying to put words in my mouth and keep trying to say that the Democratic Party is hurting children. But your party is the one that is tearing families apart at the border and allowing children to die in federal custody. So whose party is actually harming children?
Wow. Let me just ask you one quick question. I mean, this is obviously a pointless conversation, and I think less of you after, I have to say.
I already think
but
less of you, so
it's an honest question. Have you thought about it? Do you have a real answer to what the governor of Virginia said, or are you going to throw yet another talking point at me? I mean, have you actually thought about it? Will you answer that question at all?
I have thought about it, and I am telling you that your party is attempting to change the conversation about Roe v. Wade and take control over women's bodies. I'm sorry that as a man, what you're focused on is controlling women's bodies, but we will not allow you to do that.
This is a child who's been born. This is not a woman's body. This is an independent person.
It just confuses me why you pretend that you have concerns over children when you're completely fine with ICE tearing families apart and children dying in federal custody.
Monica, thank you. I appreciate it.
Psycho.